"That's enough, Susan," my mom snapped, her voice cracking with tension as she leaned across the dining table, glaring at me. The twinkling lights of the Christmas tree flickered softly in the background, casting shadows on the walls, but any sense of holiday cheer had long since evaporated. I sat stiffly in my seat, hands clenched tightly in my lap, trying to keep my emotions in check as the anger simmered beneath the surface. My dad didn't miss a beat, his voice laced with irritation. "You always find a way to make everything revolve around you." His words sliced through me, sharper than I expected, and for a long second, the only sound was the quiet tick-tick of the clock above the fireplace. "My name is Susan Blanchard." I was 32 at the time, and it was the late 70s, a time when families leaned heavily on each other, especially in the rural stretches of Illinois where we lived. Our family's farm, which had been passed down through generations, had fallen on hard times. Years earlier, I'd left for Chicago, becoming a lawyer, something my parents never quite forgave me for. In their eyes, I had abandoned our values. Meanwhile, my older brother Jake stayed behind to manage the farm, and he was constantly held up as the family's hero. I never begrudged him for staying. What hurt was how, no matter what I did, I never felt like I truly belonged anymore. Since that summer, I'd been quietly sending money to help cover the farm's expenses. Jake had convinced me not to say anything, claiming our parents' pride would take a hit if they found out. I understood. I didn't want to embarrass them either, and I trusted Jake. I believed he'd do the right thing. But now, sitting there on Christmas Eve, listening to our parents shower him with praise, talking about how he'd worked so hard to keep the farm going, I felt like I'd been sucker punched. It hit me like a wave. He'd been passing off my financial help as his own. "Jake's the reason we've been able to keep our heads above water," my mom said proudly, her voice full of admiration. "We owe everything to him." I looked at Jake, hoping for even a flicker of guilt, a glance that said, "I'm sorry." But all I saw was a smug grin as he lounged in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. That's when I spoke up. "I'm the one who's been sending the money since July," I said, my voice unsteady but loud enough to cut through the holiday chatter. My dad let out a dry laugh, shaking his head as if I'd told the world's most outrageous joke. "Don't be ridiculous, Susan. Jake's been here, busting his back for this family. Why would you even say something like that?" His dismissal stung, but what hurt more was how quick they were to shut me down. My mom folded her arms, frowning at me. "You've always had a flair for making everything about yourself. Can't we have just one peaceful Christmas without your drama?" I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, shame and fury battling for control. "It's not drama," I replied, more firmly now. "I've been making deposits directly into the farm's account, at the bank in Chicago. Every single dollar came from me." But they weren't hearing me. My dad waved me off in annoyance, and my mom turned to Jake, who offered a clueless shrug as if he had no idea what I was talking about. That was the moment I knew, they didn't want the truth. They had already chosen their version of the story, and in it, I was the outsider once again. I turned to Jake, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend you don't know what I'm talking about? You know I've been the one making those deposits at the Chicago branch for months." He didn't even blink. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with a smug little grin, like the whole thing was some kind of joke to him. "I have no clue what you're talking about, Susan," he said with a fake casual shrug, every word laced with phony innocence. My jaw clenched. "Unreal," I muttered under my breath, shaking my head. But of course, our parents didn't say a word in my defense. My dad let out a long, irritated sigh like I was the one causing trouble, and my mom glanced at Jake with sympathy, like he was being unfairly targeted. I stood, the sound of my chair scraping against the floor loud in the tense silence. I looked Jake dead in the eyes. "You know exactly what I'm referring to," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "Those deposits weren't small. And you've been sitting here letting them treat you like some kind of golden child while taking credit for my work. If you don't fess up right now, I swear I'll drive back to Chicago first thing in the morning and bring back the proof myself." Jake just shrugged again, still lounging like he didn't have a care in the world. "Knock yourself out, Susan," he said with a smirk. "Whatever conspiracy theory you've cooked up, go for it." That was the moment I realized he didn't think I'd actually follow through. To him, this was just another spat, the kind that always ended with me backing down to keep the peace. That smug look on his face said it all. He thought I was bluffing. But that just steeled my resolve. He'd taken advantage of me for too long, lied to our parents, soaked in their praise like he earned it, and acted like my contributions didn't even matter. Not anymore. I was going to Chicago. And this time I wasn't coming back empty-handed. The next morning, I packed my things in silence. I couldn't stand another minute in that house. When I told our parents I was leaving, my mom gave a heavy, guilt-laden sigh. "It's Christmas, Susan," she said, like I was the one tearing the family apart. My dad didn't even lift his eyes from his coffee. "Always has to be drama with you," he mumbled. "And Jake?" He was practically glowing, reclining in his chair with that same smug expression like he'd just scored another easy win. But I wasn't staying, not when everyone around me refused to see what was really going on. I knew the banks were closed for the holiday, but it didn't matter. I had to get away, clear my head, and do what needed to be done. The drive back to Chicago felt endless. The roads were nearly deserted, everyone else was home, warm, surrounded by family. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the heater doing its best to push back against the icy air creeping in. My thoughts ran wild, cycling through every moment of the argument the night before. Jake didn't think I had it in me. He thought I'd roll over like I always did, too beaten down by our parents' blind trust in him to take action. But this time? I was done being silent. I was done being overlooked. I passed miles of frozen landscape, snow-blanketed fields, glassy lakes, all of it blurring past the windshield as I drove toward the truth. And once the banks reopened, I was there. That morning, as the wind cut through the streets and the chill bit at my skin, I walked into the Chicago branch with purpose. The teller greeted me with a warm but routine smile. "Good morning," he said. "What can I help you with today?" I explained my request clearly but firmly. I needed printed records of every deposit I'd made into the Blanchard farm account since July. The teller gave a quick nod and disappeared into the back, reappearing moments later with a hefty ledger and a small machine designed to print receipts. He found the account and began feeding entries into the printer, which hummed and clicked as each transaction printed. One by one, receipts rolled out, each marked with my name, the dates, and the deposit amounts. When he handed over the pile, he offered a courteous, "Here you are, ma'am. Let us know if we can assist you further." I thanked him, my fingers trembling slightly as I gripped the stack. These weren't just receipts, they were evidence. Concrete proof that Jake had been lying, and that I wasn't going to stand by silently anymore. Clutching the papers tightly, I returned to my car. The roads were still slick from the snow that had blanketed the area earlier in the week, but I barely noticed. I had one goal: get home and show them. The stack of receipts sat securely on the passenger seat, held down by a small paperweight I'd snagged from my desk before heading out. Every time I glanced at them, my anger flared anew. I couldn't believe Jake thought he'd get away with this, and even worse, that our parents had immediately believed him. The drive back felt agonizingly long. With each mile, the familiar stretch to the farm felt more distant. Passing icy fields and sleepy towns, I mentally replayed every smug word Jake said to me on Christmas Eve, every dismissive tone from our parents. By the time I turned onto the long gravel driveway of the farmhouse, adrenaline was coursing through my veins. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was firm. I wasn't leaving until the truth was out in the open. I stepped inside, gripping the receipts tightly, snow still clinging to my coat. My mom stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot, while my dad read the newspaper at the kitchen table. Jake, ever relaxed, leaned against the counter, munching on an apple. They all looked up as I entered, but I didn't wait for pleasantries. I marched over to the table and dropped the stack of receipts in front of my father. "Here," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "Every deposit I've made into the farm account since July. You'll find the dates, the amounts, and my name on every one. My dad set down his newspaper, furrowing his brows as he picked up the papers and began flipping through them. My mom joined him, drying her hands with a towel, skepticism written across her face. Jake didn't budge from his place, but I caught the flicker of hesitation in his expression. This can't be right, my dad said, scanning the documents. Why would you do all this, Susan? My mom leaned closer, squinting at the receipts. But Jake told us he was covering all the expenses, she said, her voice laced with disbelief and confusion. I turned and faced Jake squarely. Well? I said, eyes locked on his. Are you still going to deny it now? Jake laughed, tossing his apple core into the trash like it was just another day. Susan, wherever you got those, they're fake, he said with a smirk. You probably whipped them up to make me look bad. His voice was smooth, dismissive, and it made my blood run cold. I glanced at my parents, hoping to catch even the smallest trace of hesitation, something that might show they were beginning to believe me. But instead, my dad shook his head slowly, his expression dark with disappointment. Susan, what's gotten into you? He muttered, his voice low and filled with anger. Even for you, this is a new low. My mother snatched the receipts off the table, holding them between her fingers like they were something vile. Did you really think we'd fall for this? She asked, her voice trembling, not with sadness, but fury. Jake's been out here every single day, keeping this farm going. And you, she snapped the papers toward me with disgust, you show up with a bunch of fake documents and expect us to just take your word for it? You've always craved attention, Susan. My throat tightened as I fought back tears. They're not fake, I said, barely able to get the words out. Call the bank if you don't believe me. But they didn't care. They stood together, side by side, locked in their unwavering support for Jake, just like they always had, while I stood alone, feeling like a stranger in the family I had once called my own. I watched in disbelief as my father let the receipts flutter back onto the table like they meant nothing. I can't believe this, I said, my voice growing louder as I tried to hold back the frustration threatening to boil over. I've been sending money for months, and all you've done is give Jake the credit and call me a liar. Even now, with proof in your hands, you still defend him. Jake leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, his smug grin enough to make my blood simmer. Don't be so dramatic, Susan, he said casually, as if none of it mattered. You've always been jealous. This is just more of the same. And that was it. I couldn't take another second. You know what? I'm done. Don't call me, don't expect anything more from me. I'm never coming back. My mom's lips tightened, and my dad looked at me with that same old disapproval, as if I was the one causing trouble, not the one trying to help. Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold outside air hit me like a slap, but it was still better than staying in that house a second longer. By the time I got back to my apartment in Chicago, my decision was set. I was done trying, done giving, done being dismissed. The very next morning, I picked up the phone and called the bank. I want to cancel all future deposits to that account, I told the teller firmly. My voice was calm, but inside I felt a fire burning. It felt strange, like cutting a cord I'd been clinging to for too long. But it also felt like I was finally setting myself free. I expected guilt to creep in, but it never did. Every time I thought of Jake's smug face and our parents' blind loyalty, I knew I had made the right choice. Let them figure it out now. Let Jake play the role of the savior. I wasn't going to keep throwing my hard-earned money into a place that never acknowledged me. 6 months passed. Not a call, not a note, not a single word from them. Sometimes I wondered how they were doing, but those thoughts were always followed by a wave of hurt, and I quickly buried them. I focused on work, on living my life. Then one summer afternoon, there was an unexpected knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I froze. There, standing on the other side, were my mom and dad. They looked older somehow, worn down, maybe even humbled. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. "Can we come in?" my dad asked, his tone softer than usual. My mom stood beside him, clutching her purse like it was holding her together, her lips pressed in a tight, uneasy line. A big part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, but my curiosity held me back. I stepped aside and motioned for them to enter. They sat down stiffly on the couch, glancing around my small apartment like they didn't quite know how to exist in it. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly, crossing my arms as I leaned against the arm of my chair. I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. Whatever they had to say, I wanted it laid out, no sugarcoating. My dad cleared his throat, staring at the carpet like he was searching for the right words in the threads. "Susan," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it, "we owe you a serious apology." My mom gave a quick nod, her grip on her purse so tight her knuckles looked like bone. "We were wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't listen when you tried to tell us what was really going on. And now we want to make things right." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back in my chair. "I'm listening," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. My dad exhaled slowly. "After you left, everything on the farm started to unravel. The bills piled up. The equipment started breaking down. The harvest wasn't enough to keep us stable. We assumed Jake had things under control, he kept saying he did. But when we pushed for answers, he finally came clean." My mom blinked back tears. "He told us the truth, Susan. That it was you who had been depositing the money. That you were the reason we managed to stay afloat all those months. It was like the floor dropped out from under us. He lied to us, and her voice broke a little, we didn't believe you when we should have." She reached out a hand, shaky and tentative. "We're so sorry, Susan. For doubting you, for the way we treated you, for all of it. You didn't deserve that." I looked between them, taking in the deep lines on their faces, the regret written in every glance. For the first time, I saw not excuses, not defensiveness, just pure, unfiltered remorse. My dad finally lifted his gaze to meet mine. "We don't expect you to forgive us right away, but we had to come here and say it, to thank you for what you did. You saved the farm, and we owe you far more than a simple apology." I didn't speak for a long moment. I let their words sit heavy in the room, let the silence stretch just long enough for them to feel it. But then I broke it, my voice cool but steady. "Where's Jake?" My mom exchanged a glance with my dad, hesitant, before replying. "He's back at the farm," she said softly. "He wanted to come today, but we thought it would be better if we came alone." My dad shifted in his seat. "He's barely spoken since admitting the truth. He knows he can't justify what he did. He's ashamed, Susan." "Ashamed," I repeated, laughing without humor. "He's ashamed now? After spending months letting you both think I was crazy? Letting you believe he was the one keeping everything together, while I got treated like a liar?" My dad looked down again, his face pale with guilt. "You're right," he murmured, barely audible. "We let this go on far longer than we should have. That's on us just as much as it is on him. But he wanted us to tell you he's sorry. He knows he doesn't deserve forgiveness, but he asked us to deliver the message." "He asked you to tell me?" I snapped, leaning forward in disbelief. "Seriously? He can't even show up in person to say it himself? And you're still covering for him? Even now?" My voice rang through the small apartment, loud and raw. I didn't care if it shocked them, I was done tiptoeing around their blind devotion. My mom opened her mouth, maybe to defend him, but I cut her off. "Do you hear yourselves? He lies, manipulates, twists everything I've done to make himself look like a hero, and now, when he's finally supposed to take ownership, you're still running interference? Is he too ashamed to face me, so you're cleaning up after him again? Do you know how absurd that is?" My dad shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. His hands were clenching his knees. "We thought this would be less painful for everyone," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Less painful for who?" I shot back. "For Jake? For you too?" Because let me tell you, this isn't easier for me. Silence fell, tense and thick. My mom kept twisting the strap of her purse in her hands, staring at her lap. My dad sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on the floor. After what felt like an eternity, he finally rose from the chair. "You're right," he said softly, his voice low. "We should have brought him. He should have looked you in the eye and apologized himself. I don't know why we didn't. I guess we've been making excuses for him so long, it's just habit." My mom stood too, clutching her bag to her chest. She looked at me with eyes brimming with tears. "We're sorry, Susan," she whispered. "You deserved better. From all of us." They didn't wait for a reply. My dad opened the door, pausing only for a second to glance back at me, regret etched into every line of his face. Then they left, the soft click of the door behind them sealing the moment. I remained where I was, frozen in my chair, surrounded by a silence so heavy it felt like a presence in the room. For the first time, they had acknowledged what I had known all along. And finally, they seemed to see it too. A week later, I heard another knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door, my stomach twisted. Jake stood there, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, looking smaller, older, and more broken than I'd ever seen him. "Susan," he said, voice hoarse, hesitant. "Can I come in?" For a brief moment, I considered slamming the door. But instead, I stepped aside and let him enter without a word. He didn't sit. Didn't take off his jacket. He just stood there in the middle of my living room, shifting nervously from foot to foot like he didn't belong, and maybe he didn't. I came to say I'm sorry," Jake said at last, his eyes flitting around the room like he couldn't bring himself to look at me directly. "For everything. For lying, for taking credit for what you did, for letting Mom and Dad treat you like you didn't matter." His voice wavered, and I stood in silence, waiting for him to go on. "I don't have any excuses," he continued. "I was jealous, Susan. I've always been jealous. You left, built a life for yourself, and I stayed behind. I thought if I held on to their approval, maybe I'd feel like I mattered. But I was wrong, about all of it." Then, just like that, his voice gave out completely. He dropped his head into his hands and started to cry. Not a few quiet tears, this was deep, guttural sobbing that seemed to come from somewhere far inside him. I could see how broken he was, how ashamed. There was no pride left in him. For a moment, I just stood there, watching, not sure what to feel. Things changed after that day. It wasn't immediate, my parents didn't reach out right away, but when they finally called, the tone was different. There were no justifications, no attempts to brush things under the rug. They didn't say it directly, but I could tell they weren't making excuses for Jake anymore. My dad mentioned they'd started handling the farm accounts themselves. My mom casually noted that Jake was trying to fix some of the damage he caused. They didn't say sorry outright, but I could hear the shift. Jake didn't try to force a reconciliation, and I was grateful for that. He gave me space. Trust isn't rebuilt in a day. But knowing my parents had finally opened their eyes, and knowing Jake had owned up to his lies, gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. No, we're not the picture-perfect family now. We never were. But we're finally starting to treat each other with something that looks a little more like honesty. And that, for me, is enough.